And I welcome everyone today to our presentation, and I will turn this over to my colleague, Michelle Clarke, for her presentation on self-advocacy and post-secondary accessibility services. Michelle?
Thank you, Stacy, and welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here today to give this presentation. Just a little bit about myself. As Stacy said, I am the Assistant Director in Student Disabilities Services over at the Johns Hopkins University side. However, I do have a connection with CTY because for a brief time, I was the Disability Administrator at CTY. Which I thoroughly enjoyed. So many of you might know my name and my face. I heard there was a big audience for this presentation, which I'm happy to hear. And I hope that some students are also in the audience to hear the information. Again, my presentation today will focus on transitioning from high school to college for students with disabilities. So the agenda today is preparing for college if you're a student with disability, and for the parents in the audience, helping your student with preparing for that transition. The process, your rights and responsibilities as a student and parent, the accommodation process and responsibilities. So making the transition from high school to college with a disability, first of all, colleges are required by law to provide accommodations to students with disabilities. Colleges are required to create an inclusive culture that celebrates disabilities as an area of diversity on their campuses, ensure equitable experiences for the students, and provide equal access through reasonable accommodations. And I put reasonable accommodations in quotations for a reason. The accommodation process. When students are in the K-12 system and in high school, they are required to get a free, appropriate education. Transition into college, as we all know, is an admissions, testing, and acceptance process. Okay, so the student have to be admitted into the college. And then after that, the student will then seek out the SDS Office for Services. In the high school platform, in the K-12 platform, accommodations are determined when students, parents, teachers identify something or they see something going on with a student. That usually happens in elementary school, sometimes middle school. It happens in high school too, but very often in the K-12 system, a disability is identified in elementary school. When your student is preparing to transition to college, the student must self-disclose to the Accessibility Disability Support Services Office. It is voluntary. We don't seek out students who have disabilities. It's nowhere on the admissions application. For some private colleges who might have an interview process, that question isn't asked. So, the student or the family have to disclose the disability to the SDS office at that college. In the K-12 system, they go by the IDEA law and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Once your student transitions into post-secondary, the laws there that I work within are Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Section 508, and mostly the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. How is documentation different from high school to college? In high school, or whether it's a public high school or private high school, the evaluation is done in the high school. If your student is attending a private high school, usually the zone high school that the student would have been attending if they were in the public platform usually have to do the evaluation for free. And then modifications and academic supports are implemented. Preparing for college, the student must come with the documentation of a disability. Colleges do not have staff or a department that starts the evaluation process. So it's very important to get the disability documented while the child is in the K-12 system, and much cheaper. Because if the student leaves the K-12 system without documentation and come to the post-secondary platform, we send you out there, we might have a list of resources or, agencies that we recommend, but that test can cost $2,500 or above. So if you think something is going on with your child now, it is very, very important to get that testing, those evaluations done while you're in high school in preparation to have something to present to college. In high school or in the K-12 system, because we know, especially at CTY, there are a lot of middle schoolers who are taking college level classes. The parent is the student advocate, right? You're making sure that the testing is done, or testings, sometimes it's more than one test, they're done. You're making sure that the meetings are held and the correct accommodations to support your child is they're all implemented. Once that child transfers to a college, the college, I don't want to say no longer deals with the parents, but that child, the student, becomes his or her own advocate and the primary contact for the SDS office. Now, there is something that the student can sign to say that the SDS office is allowed to communicate with the parents. However, that communication always involves the student. If a parent contacts the SDS office and want to know, did the student check in with you? Are they using their accommodations? What is their, they're not telling me about their midterm grade. They're not telling me anything about faculty members. Have you heard any complaints from faculty members that the student isn't turning in assignments? The first thing the SDS office counselor or advisor would do is contact the student or loop the student into that email and set up an appointment with the student, and the student can invite the parent onto that platform, whether it's Zoom or Team or whether it's an in-person meeting, to attend that meeting. Progress report in the K-12 system, that is done with parents and teachers. Once you transition to post-secondary, the student is responsible for monitoring his or her own academic progress with the instructor. The SDS staff will never reach out to an instructor and say, hey, how is Michelle doing? Is she turning in her assignments on time? What is her midterm grades? What is outstanding? When you get to the post-secondary platform, that onus is on the student. So I get asked this a lot. Am I required to disclose my disability in post-secondary? And the answer is no. Disclosure of a disability is completely voluntary. However, in order to receive accommodations, the student must first self-identify with the Accessibility Disability Office. You do not have to disclose a disability during the admissions process. Once the student is accepted, contact that office and register. So another big question we get asked often, should I disclose my disability during the admissions process? Nowhere on a college admissions application would it ever ask a student, do you have a disability? Some students include it in their admissions essay, and some students don't. The only disability, and more than likely you won't have to disclose it because it's visible, but that the admissions counselor probably would see on admissions day or open house, is if you have a physical disability, you're in a wheelchair, you're blind with a cane or a guide dog. because then there are certain accommodations that the student might need when attending college open house and accepting days. So those type of physical disabilities where you need universal ADA accommodations for any event that the college, public open event that the college is having about the admissions process. Yes, you disclose that. However, I have a learning disability, can I get into this college? That should never be disclosed on your admissions application. And it doesn't have a determinant factor on getting into the college, right? You get into, and when it comes to a college, you get into the college per that college's admissions process. That's it. It doesn't have anything to do with a disability. So what are your rights? I do a lot of these presentations. I live in Maryland for Baltimore County Public Schools. And I tell students and parents all the time, the student, once in high school, should get familiar with their disability or disabilities, get up-to-date testing and copies of documentation, such as the psychoeducational evaluation while they're in high school, because this test costs a lot of money once you have aged out of the K-12 system. Now, I say the psychoeducational evaluation because a lot of schools give the student the IEP. The IEP is developed from this psychoeducational evaluation. It is the school psychologist does a battery of tests and the special educator, and they come up with this documentation. The IEP is always stems from the information on this documentation. However, a lot of schools would provide you with the IEP and not the psychoeducational evaluation. That is important for parents to ask for. It is considered having an adult evaluation at the age of 14. So if your student takes this, if let's say your student has an IEP from elementary school and middle school, please ask for the student to be retested once they enter high school. Please ask for the psychoeducational evaluation, because that, once the student at the age of 14, the Woodcock-Johnson's and Welch's tests, they are considered adult tests. And once you have a copy of that, that can last the student throughout their post-secondary education, undergrad and graduate. A lot of colleges don't accept an IEP older than 3, some, and it's pushing it 5 years, okay? But the psychoeducation evaluation is accepted throughout the adulthood of that student. Be sure and understand, and it's important for students to start attending IEP and 504 meetings or educational plan meetings if you're in a private school, and understand what it says and what your academic and what academic strengths and weaknesses are, right? So I say that because the student knows best, especially, middle school and high school students, they know their learning style. They know which accommodations are working well and which, the ones that aren't working well. And they are the only ones in that meeting can speak up and say, well, yeah, my IEP or 504 says this, note taker and calculator and all these things, but I really don't need that. What works well for me is if I get to record my classes. I don't like other people's notes, so it is very important for the students to start learning their personal strengths and weaknesses. And I'm talking about on the academic level. Know your accommodations, what works and what doesn't work. I think I just, talked about that. There are many times that in post-secondary, the process is called an intake process. It's an interactive process with the student and the SDS, Student Disabilities Services counselor. And during that meeting, after we have read the documentation and we sit and meet with the student, I can't tell you how many times a student transferring from high school to college don't know their accommodations, don't know what their disability is, what disabilities are, have never attended an IEP meeting at their high school. So it is important, parents, to start getting your student involved in that process, involved in those meetings, because at the post-secondary level, they're the ones who is sitting down with the disability services officer and discussing their strengths and weaknesses, their accommodations, what worked, what doesn't work, alternatives to what they had in high school. So I just touched on all of these. Learn how to express your needs, and I'm talking directly to the students. I know it's a school day, the middle of the day, many of them are probably in school, but this will be posted on YouTube. Please have your students look at this video. Very important. Understand the academic impact of your disability. Get educated on your rights and responsibilities. Very important. What are my rights once I transfer to post-secondary? As the first slide said, you have a right to equal access to education as everyone else at that institution. You have a right to reasonable accommodations in post-secondary. What we have this saying in post-secondary, in the K through 12 system, they have to guarantee success, right? Once you transfer to post-secondary, we grant a student equal access. Very different. We don't guarantee success in college to any student, whether you're registered with the Office of Student Disability Services, or if you're a student who isn't, you are allowed to fail. Documentation. So documentation varies in college. As I said, some colleges will accept an IEP or 504 plan. Some colleges want that psychoeducation evaluation. Documentation also varies in as the type of disability the student has. So, you know, if it's a psychological disability, we are expected to see a psychological report. If it's a LD, a learning difference, then the psychoed evaluation from high school showing strengths and weaknesses, IQ, processing, highs and lows. There are numbers there that we are looking for to see the student processing speed, to see, yeah, the student, you know, does have this calculator. They do well in everything else, but math is very tough for them. So the types of documentation that is required in post-secondary is very different. In the K through 12 system, whether you're in the public or private K through 12 system, is the IEP or 504 or educational plan. So do your research on the college's website that you are planning to attend and see what type of documentation the college is seeking per your disability. FERPA is the Family Education Right and Privacy Act. Protects the privacy of education records. The rights in the K through 12, the rights belong to the parent or guardian. Once the student transitions to post-secondary, that the FERPA rights transfer to the student. What is considered reasonable accommodation in post-secondary? It does not fundamentally alter the nature of the course or program. It doesn't constitute as an undue burden to the faculty members and the college. Most colleges, and I don't want to say I'm speaking for all, I work at Johns Hopkins, and I can just list a few of the things that we would consider a fundamental alteration, or, you know, having a burden on the faculty member. We do not hire personal attendants. The student can come with their own. We do not provide laptops to the students. We do not have special tutoring for students with disabilities. We do not ask faculty to spend extra time on reteaching or teaching privately or private tutoring. We do not force faculty members to change the format of an exam. Examples of reasonable accommodations in post-secondary, and please keep in mind, again, I work for Johns Hopkins, and these are mostly Johns Hopkins accommodation. I've worked for several higher ed institutions, and they're all different. But I see we're running down on time, so I'm not going to read them out, but please take a look at them. 50%, 100% extra time is typical use of a calculator, reduced distraction, emotional support animals, the big one. Some students want to bring an extra refrigerator because of, their meal plans. They might want to store their own food, but these are typical, reasonable accommodations. What is the student responsibility in post-secondary? Identify yourself to the Accessibility Disability Services office. Disclose your disability before taking the placement exam. This is a big one. A lot of students don't know that once they're accepted into a college and they put down their deposit, and this is the college I'm going to go to, a lot of times you have to take a placement exam just to see, are you ready for English 101? Are you ready for Calc or stats? At that time, that's usually in the summer before your classes start. Please contact the SDS office and disclose your disability at that time so you can get accommodations on the placement exam. If you don't, you'll have to take the placement exam within the allotted time that the college allows for everyone. Submit documentation and make an appointment to discuss your accommodations. Follow the procedures to use the accommodations. Meet the expectation of each class and of the college. Very important. So you've been accepted. Now what? Make sure and contact the SDS office. They're not seeking you out. You have to self-disclose. Apply for accommodations. Submit your documentation. This all should be done in the summer. Attend and meet with staff and learn how to self-advocate. Very important. I think I just gave the big secret about the placement test, and as you are allowed to take a placement test with accommodations even before you start taking classes at the college. But again, you have to seek out the SDS office and self-disclose your disability. I would like to thank everyone for attending. And I hope the information was very resourceful to you. And I'm now open to any questions. If you type it in the chat, Stacy will read aloud. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle.